Jackson with a breaking news special report. Donald Trump on trial, but we're learning he may not end up on the stand at all after an explosive day with a tough, but tough to follow at times, cross-examination of the prosecution's star witness. That's Michael Cohen, who prosecutors think can connect the dots between that $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels for her silence about an alleged affair, one that Mr. Trump denies, and today got personal with the former president's lead attorney, Todd Blanche, asking Cohen if he called Mr. Trump a crying little blank or that he called Mr. Trump a dictator D-bag. Cohen responding, it sounds like something he would say. Blanche has prepared for this cross for months, according to a source, and over, he seemed to be trying to get a rise out of Cohen, asking him point blank, do you want to see Mr. Trump convicted? Cohen said, sure. And while it got personal, some of what we heard during this cross-examination didn't seem to get yet to the meat of the case, the heart of the charges here. Cohen's allegation that he paid Stormy Daniels at Mr. Trump's direction so that her story would not affect Mr. Trump's chances of becoming president of the United States. Cohen also maybe trying to appeal to a jury that already heard a ton about how he's a liar, saying he does have regrets, that he, in his words, violated my moral compass and I suffered the penalty. Now, in just the last 20 minutes, we heard from the former president. Court has wrapped up for the day. He's walking outside. He didn't bring up Cohen, and apparently he may not speak at all in court. His lawyer saying he may call up one other expert when the defense takes its turn to make its case. But other than that, it's probably it. So what does that mean timeline-wise? It means Michael Cohen is probably the last major voice we're going to hear in this trial, because prosecutors also say they're going to wrap up after him. So look at the calendar. It means that this trial could finish up maybe, like, again, these are question marks here. We know there's no trial tomorrow. Maybe more Cohen testimony expected Thursday. That's what Todd Blanche said right at the end. You've got Barron Trump's graduation on Friday. No court that day. Could we see closing arguments next week? Maybe we'd see a verdict on these 34 felony counts before Memorial Day. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to take you inside all the rooms cameras couldn't be inside for every key element coming out of court, what it means, and importantly, why it matters, why Cohen is so central here. Our team of reporters and legal and political experts has you covered, ready to break it all down. I want to start with Vaughn Hilliard, and let's start with this cross, right, because it's sort of on pause for now. It's going to pick back up on Thursday. Big theme here totally seems to be going after Cohen's credibility again and again, right?
Right. It's not exactly disputing the actual documented evidence, the actual invoices or the checks that were signed by Donald Trump when he was in the White House, reimbursing Michael Cohen that $130,000. Instead, it's trying to sow doubt in the jury's minds about the credibility of Michael Cohen. But there was some wiggling and wavering around the questioning by Todd Blanche, the defense attorney for Donald Trump, Hallie, in which he was questioning him about whether he had leaked a story to the press. There were questions about whether he was turning on Donald Trump and cooperating with the district attorney's office just so he could potentially have a shorter prison sentence after he pled guilty in 2018 on federal charges, including some related to the underlying crimes alleged against Donald Trump. And so for the defense attorneys for Donald Trump, they were kind of asking him questions more about, like, how much money he made off the books and his TikTok in which he has slammed Donald Trump over the last couple of years. Again, trying to sow doubt in the minds of the jury about the actual motive and intent of Michael Cohen saying the things about Donald Trump that he's saying.
So, Vaughn, what's interesting here, and I want to go through some of the highlights for folks who were not, as you were, immersed in every bit and piece of it. You were in court, I know, for a bit. We're going to get to that. But at one point, Cohen was saying he lied about the Stormy Daniels payment to protect Mr. Trump, to stay on message, to demonstrate continued loyalty. Prosecutors seem to think that what he said was enough to make their case. Explain that.
Right. Using Michael Cohen, who is really the one providing the firsthand account of so much of these meetings, including 3 days before Inauguration Day, when he says he and the chief financial officer went into Donald Trump's office in New York and actually hashed out exactly how much money that he was going to get paid every month in those reimbursement checks and how they got to that point, the fact he was going to get a bonus. And every step of the way, they went back to why he continued to lie on behalf of Donald Trump. And just look at one of the exchanges between one of the prosecutors and Michael Cohen, in which Susan Hoffinger, the prosecutor, asked, did you continue to try to protect him? Again, we're talking about 2017, 2018, when he continued to, what he says, lie for Donald Trump. And he says, yes, ma'am. Did you continue to lie for him? Yes. Why'd you do that? Out of loyalty and in order to protect him. It was not until months after the story became public in early 2018 where Michael Cohen, you could say, flipped on Donald Trump. And the reason he continued to defend him, he said, was because of that sense of loyalty to him. Again, they worked together dating back to 2007. They had a long-standing relationship.
So, Vaughn, as we mentioned, you were in court there. I want to get your sense a little bit of what the news people call the color of it all, like what a normal person would call the vibe inside the room, and the Donald Trump of it all as well, because the former president initially said at the beginning of this trial, he said it before, he'd be interested in testifying. Sounds like his lawyers do not want him to, and that he is not going to.
Right. Donald Trump had suggested that, and I think the question ultimately comes down to whether Donald Trump thinks his own defense team has built up a credible case, on his behalf. Donald Trump usually believes that he is the smartest guy in the room. We knew that through his presidency. And the question here is whether he will be satisfied by the cross-examination that his defense attorneys put on here. And right now, that is questionable. I was in there in that courtroom when Michael Cohen, in a very solemn, regretful way, say that he regretted his actions, that he regretted being a bully at times for Donald Trump, and he was making eye contact with the jurors throughout his testimony. And this sounded like somebody who was almost like, it was like the day after he pled guilty and before he went to prison. He served more than a year in prison, again, for those underlying crimes that are alleged against Donald Trump. And, looking for Donald Trump here, he sat there about 80–90% of the time with his eyes closed. But he had allies like Speaker Mike Johnson who were there on his behalf. And so for Donald Trump, potentially his future, if he were not to win the election, he were to be found guilty and found to have to serve prison time, there is a lot on the line here. And it would be tough for Donald Trump, I think, in hindsight, to not take the stand in his defense, depending on how he thinks his own defense attorneys are doing on his behalf, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard, more to come, of course, in the days ahead, in the week ahead at least. Appreciate it. Let me bring in now somebody who knows Michael Cohen well. That's Lanny Davis, the former attorney and current legal advisor for Michael Cohen. Lanny, thank you for making your way here to the set.
Thank you.
As we talked about, you know Michael Cohen well. And what was interesting today was the way that the defense in the cross-examination was trying to portray Michael Cohen as a guy out for revenge, a guy obsessed. And they used that word, obsession. At one point, Blanche asked him, you were actually obsessed with President Trump, weren't you? And Cohen denied that he was, just that he admired him tremendously. Another time, Cohen said he was, quote, knee-deep into the cult of Donald Trump. You watched, I think in many ways, this relationship deteriorate over time. What do you make of this?
Well, I watched the moment of truth where he turned and decided to change and tell the truth. And I was skeptical that anyone would believe him. And it came because his family finally said enough and broke him 10 years of lying for Donald Trump. So when he testified in front of Congress, there was a prelude to what we're seeing, which is in front of partisan Republicans with a sign on the wall. You may remember, liar, liar, pants on fire, and no judge to protect him. He kept his cool. I actually sat behind him with a signal if I touch his back, he would lower his tone. And that's where he's going to be today. And I think the liar, liar, pants on fire is all I hear my fellow commentators criticizing him say. At some point, the jury knows that he lied for Donald Trump. How many times can the cross-examiner prove that? Now the question is, do they believe that he actually turned and expressed shame and remorse? And then do they see documents supporting him, making him more credible? And that's the key.
You did not have your hand on Michael Cohen's back today in court.
No.
You didn't do that yesterday. But the
that was our secret.
Yeah, exactly. There was no secret signal there. But the person I think that a lot of my colleagues in the industry saw was a little bit different from the Michael Cohen we've seen. He's somebody who can be sort of a big personality. He was not that way on the stand. We saw today Todd Blanche, it seemed, try to maybe get under his skin a little bit. Didn't get angry during the cross, at least not based on the notes that we're getting from our colleagues in court. Did that surprise you, or did you expect that given all the prep that Cohen has done?
First of all, they've set such a low bar by calling him a liar, 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 and he's going to blow up, and Todd Blanche has all these expectations that I think he'll succeed. But on the night of Mother's Day weekend, I have to confess, I excused myself from the dinner table to talk to him.
This weekend?
Yes,
What did you tell him?
Well, what he told me is, I know everybody expects me to blow it, and they're going to provoke me, but I'm going to remember what we did in front of Elijah Cummings, which was with Jim Jordan yelling, "You're a liar," and Mark Meadows and all the Republicans trying to provoke him. He wasn't provoked. So this is his second rodeo, maybe his third rodeo, because he was cross-examined during the Attorney General's trial. So I think he's going to exceed expectations and maybe even succeed.
Does he worry about what happens to him if Donald Trump is not convicted?
He's always worried about Trump's venom and attacking his wife on Twitter and his wife's father on Twitter. And his family feels the risk of Donald Trump's wrath. So, yes, he does worry about everything to do with Trump. But I think he's learned to live with that worry. Once he made the turn, it was at the end of June 2018 when I decided to go forward with him. And since then, he's kept his word to own his lies and accept and convince people he's ashamed, and use the word shame.
You talk about owning his lies. There are, just objectively speaking, a web of them, as you well know.
Correct.
Everything from, obviously, you know, we've talked about the testimony to Congress, Robert Mueller. I mean, the graphic is up here. What he talked about in his book called Revenge here. Do you believe, and I'm asking you to separate this a little bit, Michael Cohen, the friend, Michael Cohen,
right.
your client, former client, right? Do you believe that that is getting through to the jury at this point, based on what you've seen coming out of court over the last 48 hours?
So I'm not sure, because it's very difficult when you're constantly being badgered and called a liar for some jurors to doubt. But the idea, sitting with the prosecutors for almost 2 years, several times a week, you may have seen my tan coat coming out every day. My children made fun, "Dad, get a new coat." All they did was surround everything he said inside this little office we sat in with documents,
with the receipts,
with text messages, with literally timeline surrounding everything he says, corroborating what he says. That, to me, is what the jury will ultimately do. If they don't like Michael, they think he's a liar, they don't believe his contrition, they have a surrounded number of documents to bolster his credibility.
Two real quick ones for you before we let you go. What are you looking for Thursday? Will you breathe a sigh of relief when it's over?
I will breathe a sigh of relief for my own sake, because I can't keep the schedule up that I'm trying to present another side on this type of show. But for him, he really does need a relief in his own mind. And I know that his family has been communicating with me. All they want to do is put him in a cocoon and try to get him to get some mental peace, which right now he's suffering pretty much.
How about you? Were you surprised to hear your name come up in the cross today?
Well, my wife called and said, "Hey, they mentioned your name." And I said, "Well, that's not the first time. My friend Chuck Todd remembers me and Bill Clinton, and I certainly was hammered by the Republicans. But I did not go to the courtroom for exactly the reason that I thought they would point me out. And I decided I'd better be talking to people like you than in New York."
We're glad you are. Lanny Davis, thank you for being here
Hallie.
in Washington. Really appreciate it. Please come back. Much more to talk about, I know, in the days to come.
Thank you, Hallie.
Thanks. Let's get into this more with our NBC News legal analyst, Danny Savalos, and former Manhattan Assistant DA Catherine Christian. Danny, we'll have to start with you, our resident criminal defense attorney expert, so to speak. The defense team for the former president had a plan for Michael Cohen today, it seemed, to try to discredit him. In your view, did they do that? Do they still have a ways to go?
Well, you mentioned a plan, and when it comes to cross-examination, you can plan, but plans go awry pretty quickly if you start going down the wrong avenue. And I think maybe to some degree that might be what happened. There's just so much to cross-examine Michael Cohen about that you sort of have a hard time organizing how to begin. And I think that's what the defense struggled with. I think some of their questions weren't as tight as they could have been.
Well, so...
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because it did seem... Like, I don't know if meandering is the right word for it, but it definitely seemed less tight, I think, than maybe Blanche has been in other instances. Is that a fair read?
No, that is a fair read. The one word, the guiding principle in cross-examination has to be control. You have to try and control the situation, because you don't have control over the witness. This is a witness who's looking to thwart you with every single question you ask. So when you think about that, you can't script things too rigidly, and you can't jump around. In fact, the wording of every question is critical. You have to be careful with questions like, is it fair to say blah, blah, blah? Is it fair to say? I mean, the witness like Michael Cohen is going to take that and throw it back at you. Yeah. It's really, really challenging. And so, so far, I think the cross has been a little meandering. I think Cohen has been difficult-ish, But he is answering questions, yes or no. Sometimes he's reluctant. Sometimes he refuses. He often answers with a qualification. I'm certain, yes. Sounds like it's right. Sounds right to me. That's not exactly answering the question, but close enough. He's not being as difficult as he could have been, and that's probably good for getting the jury to have faith in him.
The prosecution also, Catherine, really they knew what was coming. They knew what Todd Blanche and team were going to do. They tried to get ahead of it by bringing up these issues, how he's made money off his connections to Mr. Trump, how he asked for a reduced sentence. They brought up the many, many lies that he's told, if you will. Do you believe that they effectively took the wind out of the defense's sails, so to speak?
They took most of the win. And all the other witnesses, by the way, who testified, who did not have nice things to say about Michael Cohen, took the wind out. So when he took the stand today, the defense, you know, they did their cross and they haven't finished, but the jury already got a sense of who Michael Cohen is. And as Lanny Davis said, they don't have to like him. They don't have to believe he's finally found his moral compass, but they have to find him credible. And they can do that with all of the circumstantial evidence.
Well, that's what it is, right? The evidence, getting to the heart of the matter here, these 34 counts of falsifying business documents. Danny, do you think the defense is going to get into that on Thursday when they pick up this cross again, or is it going to be all about Michael Cohen, sort of the person, the personality, the character?
They have to. I mean, they have to touch the documents, but I mean, they're going to spend a lot of time just calling him a liar. And they, by the way, they run the risk there of overkill. I remind everyone of the Stormy Daniels cross, where they started focusing too much on, do you remember it? You don't remember if you walked to the hotel or got a car. You don't remember if you had dinner or didn't have dinner, and you may have lied about having dinner. When you focus, and I'm guilty of this too. I've done this too. You start preparing a cross, you hyper-focus on every lie this person has ever told, every inconsistency. And what you do is, in hyper-focusing on that, you can lose the jury. And I wonder if by just going over and over and over again on all of Michael Cohen's moments of dishonesty, that might be a little overkill. It's just such a difficult line to walk.
Catherine, real quick on the redirect, what does the prosecution have to do, do you think? What would be their big goal?
Well, they have to rehabilitate Michael Cohen. Okay. For anything, like the defense, were, you know, you were not allowed to speak to Donald Trump or his family. Well, that was because this was an investigation, and everyone has a lawyer. So anything that was misleading in the questioning, Susan Hoffinger, the prosecutor, is going to redirect and bring that out. She may decide, depending on how the rest of the cross goes, not to redirect, because then it allows the other side to recross.
Catherine, can I ask you about another legal issue that'll end up leading into our next conversation in just a second, but that's the gag order, right? Because an appeals court upheld the gag order imposed here. He's already been violating it in the eyes of this judge, Judge Merchan, 10 times. One of our other NBC analysts, former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance, suggests that the gag order prevents him not just from making comments about, you know, jurors and witnesses, but that it also prevents other people from making comments. Mr. Trump has called some of these Republicans who have come up to the courthouse speaking on his behalf his surrogates. Do you believe that he runs the risk of violating the gag order if he did direct some of these allies to speak out against the people that Donald Trump is not allowed to speak out against?
Well, you said the magic word. If he directed them to do it, then he's in trouble. They're all going to say, no, he didn't direct me. I've been following the trial, and I know these are horrible people. So it's going to be very hard to prove that he directed these senators and other politicians from saying these things about witnesses.
Danny, is it just us, or is this trial progressing at blazing speed?
Oh, no, it's not just us. I think I've been saying this for days. I think this is the prosecution's strategy, because it really throws off the defense. The faster they get the witnesses up and down, the less time there is to prepare. And by the way, I'll give you a quick example. The defense said they may not even have their expert ready for their one witness until Monday. I mean, think of that. That is totally disorienting to the defense if the prosecution is finished that soon. But it may get stretched to Monday after all is said and done with the days off.
When do you think we're looking at closings? What, next week maybe, right? Early next week?
I do. I think we're looking at closings next week. I believe, and again, don't save the tape, I believe there will be 0.0 witnesses for the defense. I think they feel like they have a reasonable doubt case, and they're going to try and pound the podium on that one.
Catherine, do you agree?
I agree
right.
with Danny.
Oh, when
We're
Catherine
saving
agrees
the
with
tape.
me, I
We
feel...
are saving this tape, that's for sure. Catherine Christian, Danny Savalas, thank you very much. Let's get big picture here on the politics of it all and everything else with our reporters and analysts, now experts in this. New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig in New York, Washington Post national editor Phil Rucker in D.C., and our very own chief political analyst Chuck Todd. The aforementioned Chuck Todd joining us here in Washington on set. Suzanne, I'll start with you first, only because you've been in the courtroom, I know, over the last few days for this Michael Cohen testimony. I just wonder, as somebody who has covered this, you know this well, what are your big takeaways? Like, what did you see that we didn't that we should know about?
Well, I was really bracing for this afternoon for this examination of Michael Cohen. We've been waiting for it, and it really just it didn't so far happen. I don't know what's going to happen on Thursday, but I found it very disjointed. And just as an example, the first question, Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's lawyer, gets up and he says, Michael Cohen, he says, you know, we've never met. And Michael Cohen says, no, we've not. And Todd Blanche says to him, but on TikTok, you called me a crying little, and then there's an expletive that I won't say. But instead of making it about Donald Trump, the first question's about Todd Blanche. And the rest of it sort of proceeded in a rather disjointed way. So I think that was kind of the big surprise was, I mean, Michael Cohen he held up on direct. I thought he did a good job. He was very even. Everybody's been worried he's going to be explosive. We didn't see it on direct, and we did not see it on cross so far.
Chuck, let me go to you on that, because to channel a famous SNL character, the hottest club in New York right now is a downtown Manhattan courtroom. And you have been seeing all these Republicans show up here, including the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, who was there, along with North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, possible VP candidate, Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, Vivek Ramaswamy, who said he would back Trump today, even if he were found guilty, when one of our producers asked. Here's a little bit more of that from today.
It's election interference, and it's tying up the president from being out on the campaign trail.
This is a travesty of justice. This is a misuse of the justice system.
That is not justice. That is a bastardization of what this country was founded on.
Is this a roll call here?
Well, I'll tell you, this is exactly what many sober-minded Washington legal and political types were worried about when there was criticism of what Alvin Bragg was doing, when he chose to basically be the first. He wanted to be the first one to indict Trump, and he's successfully the first one to indict Trump.
This was called a zombie case.
That's right. His case is the first case to go to trial. And the fear that a lot of folks in Washington had, a lot of folks that really believe that Donald Trump needs to be held accountable for his actions in office, was that by essentially leading with the weakest case, not just the weakest case legally, the weakest case politically. Because the real problem I think they have with the court of public opinion here is the voters have already decided whether Trump's character was bad enough or not to be elected president. The Access Hollywood tape, we all heard it. Yeah. Everybody heard it. Essentially, this was all a derivative of that. But in many cases, it's the same thing that happened to the Republicans when they went after Bill Clinton, and they were going, I don't understand this. Why aren't people more outraged by what he did with Monica Lewinsky? I remember at one point in the '96 campaign, and this had to do with other scandals, Bob Dole was out there, where's the outrage? And the fact of the matter is, voters knew about the Bill Clinton character flaws before the election. They factored it in and elected him anyway. That's what happened here with Donald Trump, these personal character flaws. And I think a lot of this is why this is not penetrating beyond, really beyond anywhere in this courtroom, beyond those that already think that Trump is guilty of something and just find him guilty of something, you know, just throw him behind bars. Because now he has successfully politicized all of the legal cases against him. And I think it really does even dilute the potency of the January 6th case if it ever gets to trial.
Much less before November, which seems like certainly not an inevitability, far from it at this point. You know, it's interesting, Phil, I hear Chuck talk about, you know, the bygone days covering previous presidents, right? You and I were in it in 2016, 2017, 2018 on the campaign trail at the White House when Donald Trump, when these revelations were in many ways first starting to come out against the, at the time, then president and then candidate. And so much of what we heard today in the cross was interesting. It felt like we were in a 2017 flashback in so many ways. It was like a walk down memory lane.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, so many of these allegations about Trump, the details, the facts of this case have been known for some time. And Chuck's right on when he says voters have factored it in. Voters already know all about his infidelity, about his business dealings, about the weird, you know, personal relationships that he's had, about the character of his lawyer, Michael Cohen, who's been a main character through all of this for years now. And so I think this trial is, you know, regardless of what the verdict ends up being, may not necessarily shift public opinion. And what you're seeing from Trump and from his attorney, Todd Blanche, is they're really trying to politicize this as much as possible. It's why he has his vice presidential potential candidates literally trekking to New York and being in court and standing behind him in front of cameras to make this a political act, to make it a part of the campaign, and to really try to solidify the support that he has with his supporters in the country.
Suzanne, I wonder if you see that, too, as a show of force and how that played actually on the ground. We know that there are, you know, handfuls of supporters of the former president showing up outside court. It has become, I think, in some ways, an interesting spectacle for members of the public who can get in to see some of this for themselves. Talk us through that.
Right. I really felt that today. And I have to say, I was talking to Andrew Weissman, one of our legal analysts here, and he was saying it was very reminiscent of mob trials where family would come in and supporters would come in. They would sit behind the defendant and they would stare at the witness. And it felt like that today, and it felt like that yesterday. There's been a parade of people come in. But the other effective thing of having them come in is there's a gag order on Donald Trump. He is very limited in what he can say, but now he's got his surrogates going to the camera and talking and saying things about the judge, the judge's family, and witnesses that Donald Trump can't say. You talked about that in the previous segment, and I think that that's been effective for him because he's now got cameras on other people saying what he wants to say.
To that end, Phil, we've heard from Democrats, the DNC, really just one clapback, but called today's attendees, I'm quoting here, the saddest posse of MAGA loyalists in Lower Manhattan, saying the former president is, again, quoting, desperate for emotional support. Listen, obviously some trash talk on the part of the DNC against a rival campaign here. Do you get the sense, based on your reporting, based on the folks you're talking to, that there is a desire among some Dems to see a more muscular response from the Democratic campaign?
You know, maybe, Hallie, but it certainly seems like President Biden is looking to keep some distance from all of this. So, you know, certainly DNC operatives who do rapid response in a campaign context are following the twists and turns in the courtroom and trying to seize any opportunities that they have. But you're not seeing the president or the vice president talking in any sort of detail about this trial. They've not given any public indication that they're even paying much attention to it. I think they're looking to see, when we get out of this trial, what does the political landscape look like? How does Biden stand vis-a-vis Trump, and how do they carry on for these, you know, 5+ months between now and November?
I'm looking at you cocking your head.
I just think it's telling that, look, Rick Scott is a very risk-averse politician. People don't realize that about him. He was the first one to go up there and basically be the buddy cop movie with Trump the first time. He's up for re-election. He also would like to be the Senate Republican leader. He's a very calculated guy. He doesn't do anything on a whim. The fact that he saw this as an asset,
as an opportunity,
should tell you the plot's been lost politically on this trial for the left.
On some of the swing state polls we've talked about here, you know, Phil talked about the political landscape, what that looks like. We talked about this last night, right? The New York Times polls showing that the current president is trailing the former president. But there are also some polls from back in March that show if he ends up convicted in this particular case, he could lose some support. In an election like this, where the margins are going to matter, those very, very slim margins, how do you see it?
It could be, but I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical.
About any needle moving
on this trial. I think he has done. This is the effectiveness of making sure you bring supporters, showing that you have no fear of this, making it easier for your supporters to see this as nothing but a political stunt. And you got to remember, we live in a fragmented media environment. And while legacy media is covering this trial very thoroughly, digital media isn't. Not all digital media, certainly not even some of the cable news media that has an audience that's more right-leaning. So even if something is revelatory in this trial, I don't know if it's going to break through in some of the places that maybe Joe Biden would love to try to convince these folks to, but it's not going to penetrate those media silos. So I think that's another aspect of this that sort of makes it makes this hit, at best, very muted.
Chuck Todd, thank you. Phil Rucker, Suzanne Craig, we're so glad to have you all here on our special coverage of the Donald Trump trial in Manhattan. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for watching. We've got a lot of other big headlines tonight. We're going to catch you up on all of it when we pick up our regular programming right after the break. Coming on the air tonight with that deadly bus crash in Florida, killing at least 8 farm workers on their way to that job. That number may go up with breaking news now tonight. Police saying they've made a key arrest just as we went on the air. Our team's there on the ground. We'll take you there live. Then just into us late today, a long-anticipated report giving new answers about that deadly bridge collapse in Baltimore and the warning sign that may have been missed hours before the crash. Plus, meme stock mania, the sequel, with BlackBerry stock now rallying. We'll explain how long this could last and what it means for this generation of internet investors. And the controversy and the chaos already going down at Cannes, which starts tonight. We'll take you to the film festival later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we've got some breaking news out of Florida where we're learning the driver of a pickup truck that crashed with a bus full of farm workers is facing criminal charges now for allegedly driving under the influence. I want to show you the aftermath now of that horrific crash. You see the white bus turned over. It is flipped on its side. This is obviously the truck now that it collided with. It's all banged up on the one side. That's the bus there. Here's what else we know about what happened. 8 people have been killed. 7 people are in critical condition, and dozens of others were also hurt. In those cases, in those injuries, it was not life-threatening, according to local officials. The Florida Highway Patrol says it all happened very early this morning, around 6:45, that the bus and the pickup truck hit each other right on the road. The bus then veers off the road through a fence, hits a tree before flipping on its side. Sam Brock is on the scene. He's following this one for us tonight. We're just learning about these charges. Tell us more.
Hallie, part of the scene is exactly as you just described from a different vantage point. This is the truck over my shoulder in the ditch right here on State Road 40. The information we learned tonight, Hallie, is that the driver, as you said, has been charged. Brian Howard, now he's been facing 8 charges of DUI manslaughter. You mentioned this as well a second ago. This happened at 6:30 in the morning as investigators from the Florida Highway Patrol are trying to piece together how this could have happened, why that truck there veered over into the center lane and collided with a bus that ended up careening into a field and killing 8 people. The fact that this happened with DUI charges over it all might explain the driving and tendencies of what happened with the driver. I should also mention, we know more about its history as well. Grand theft auto, fleeing from the scene of a crash, driving on the suspended license multiple times. Tragically, the outcome and upshot of all this, Hallie, is that 8 people are killed. We know that 7 are in critical condition, but authorities did say they expect that number to increase as a result of several of them being in very dire straits at the moment. We're looking at some of the images right now. This was shared by the Florida Highway Patrol from this morning. That bus now, which is a retired school bus, has now been towed away, and they were headed to a watermelon farm. This is a part of Florida that produces a very large amount of agriculture. It's the 5th largest county in the state, over-indexes in terms of its production. I spoke with some of the folks here who work in the area, and they say that this is seasonal. Absolutely, there are a lot of farm workers, and it appears many of them migrant farm workers coming in and out. That business, Cannon Watermelons, did post a statement on their Facebook page saying that due to these losses and immense amount of injuries that were endured this morning, they are closing down business today at this difficult time as the community tries to process this and certainly tries to understand what the ultimate death toll will be. And the saddest part, potentially, Hallie, is the fact that many of these family members probably aren't even here to be able to get this news. It's difficult to notify next of kin.
And I understand there's a language barrier that is also having an impact there as well. Sam, can you pull out one beat more broadly here? Because this is putting a spotlight on a very specific kind of crash. And that is a crash like this, a crash that ends up killing farm workers in this country. Talk about some of those transportation stats and why that is.
Yeah, this really shocked me, actually, to learn that, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2021, transportation incidents were the #1 cause of death for farm workers and those working on farms here. And so that is very telling. There's a lot of possible explanations. Rural areas early in the morning, also potential safety gaps when it comes to regulation. But the federal government confirming that this is the #1 cause of death. And as we heard from investigators earlier today, this is not a scenario in which family members are expecting something tragic. This is the worst part of their job when it comes as a total shock. Here is the sheriff here of Marion County explaining that a few hours ago. Take a listen.
I've worked many fatalities in my career, and this is the death that you do not expect from your family members. This is the death that is a shock to you, and it's going to be hard on them.
Hallie, there is still a heavy police presence here. As you can tell, the investigation apparently is going to last months, potentially up to 6 months before we get some answers. Back to you.
Sam Brock live for us there in Florida. Sam, thank you very much. Got to get to some breaking news now out of Baltimore, where we're getting some new answers tonight as to what happened in that catastrophic, deadly bridge collapse. This new NTSB report in just the last hour or so reveals for the very first time that there was a power failure hours before a different series of power outages, apparently, that may have led that ship to crash into one of the pillars at the base of that bridge. Remember, these 6 construction workers were killed in that collapse. I want to bring in Ryan Nobles now, who's following this one for us tonight. Was this a warning sign, Ryan? What else do we know?
Yeah, Hallie, this is a pretty significant development that came out of this preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board, and it reveals that just 10 hours before that collapse that led to the death of those 6 construction workers and the complete collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, that this ship, the massive container ship Dali, had a power failure just 10 hours before it was scheduled to leave the port of Baltimore. Now, at this point, the NTSB is not drawing any conclusions as to whether or not that power failure then led to the 2 subsequent power failures that ultimately led to crews losing control of this ship and it careening into the base of the bridge and the bridge collapsing. But it certainly is raising a lot of questions. And we're also learning more about the specific timeline of everything that happened. And these 2 separate power failures that took place, what's interesting is that they actually were able to regain power to the ship, but then they lost it immediately after. And by the time they realized that they had lost control of the ship, it was not nearly enough time to drop an anchor, not nearly enough time for tugboats to get to the ship to help guide it away from the base of the bridge. It then smashed into the bridge, leading to the complete collapse. That second power outage, Hallie, was only when the bridge was 350 yards away from the base of the bridge. So you can understand why there was such an immediate need to have things happen quickly. They did say that the crew did immediately contact first responders and the authorities. That's what led to the shutting down of the bridge and alerting and preventing cars from crossing over the span before the bridge collapse took place. And then one other note from this report that I think is significant, the harrowing stories of the people involved. There was a crew member on board the ship at that time that was dropping the anchor. He actually had to abandon that effort. Otherwise, he would have been hit by debris from the ship, from the bridge, I should say, as it was collapsing into the water. And then also one of the maintenance supervisors who was on the bridge at the time, walking the span of the bridge, had to run to get to a part of the span of the bridge that wasn't collapsing, barely made it there in time before the rest of the bridge collapsed into the water. Hallie?
Just some really intense details coming out of that. Ryan Nobles, thank you very much for being there. Appreciate you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Secretary of State making a surprise visit to Ukraine. There he is on the ground in Kyiv, meeting, of course, with the Ukrainian president there, trying to reassure Ukrainians as Russia keeps launching these intense attacks. Secretary Blinken says all the U.S. military help on the way will make, in his words, a real difference on the battlefield. Number 2, we're learning today that Hunter Biden's federal gun case will go to trial next month, early June. So we say next month, that's really just a couple weeks away. The federal judge in this case denying Hunter Biden's attorney's plea to delay the trial to September. The president's son's attorneys said they needed more time to really prepare. Remember, Hunter Biden is accused of lying about using drugs on a form to buy a gun back in 2018. He has pleaded not guilty. Number 3, researchers now say 2023 was the hottest summer the Northern Hemisphere has seen in the last 2,000 years. Last year's summer was also nearly 4 degrees warmer than the coldest summer on record. 2023 also now the hottest overall year ever. Number 4, Comcast, our parent company, says it's coming out with a new streaming bundle. You can get Peacock, Netflix, Apple TV Plus all together at a discount. If you're an existing Comcast customer, you'll be eligible. TBD on how much it's going to cost. We've talked about this, the quote-unquote rebundling of streamers. This one's sort of similar to the one that's coming out from Verizon. We told you also last week about that plan from Disney and Warner Brothers to bundle Disney Plus, Hulu, and Max. Number 5, sad news for lovers of the Cheddar Bay biscuit. The chain Red Lobster is shutting down dozens of locations across the country. Another indication of Red Lobster's financial struggles. It's one of the only times in its more than 50-year history that Red Lobster is closing dozens of stores at once. Coming up, the new charges a Florida principal is facing after some stunning video of him caught on a security camera We're going to show you after the break. So welcome to Meme Stock Mania Part 2 tonight. You know, those kind of randomish stocks that get a bunch of hype online and then spike in the real world. Look at AMC Theaters up today, something like 31% at the close. Shares of BlackBerry up about 12%. And look at GameStop up 180% since Monday. That's the first meme stock we saw this happen to. Remember, these aren't usually companies that are like favored by Wall Street, but they are favored by guys like Roaring Kitty. Remember, we told you about him yesterday, the one who came back online with this meme of a gamer like leaning intently forward in their chair. It was like, if you see this, you're like, who cares? Well, other people saw it and they're like, okay, Roaring Kitty's back. He's the influencer behind that OG meme stock rally back in 2021 when these groups of investors online got behind stocks of companies that were like, you know, maybe not doing so well and kind of flipped their fortunes. The whole saga was immortalized in the 2023 movie Dumb Money. Check this out.
Oh, there, yeah. It's crazy.
Holy
that if you go short in some of these elaborate options trades, you can lose money to infinity.
GameStop now.
Star of that scene, our own Christine Romans is joining us now. We'll get into a behind the scenes of Dumb Money a little bit later on. But like, break down what's happening here for us, right? Because it's so interesting. We talked about meme stocks a couple years ago. It's back. Why? Yeah. How long is it going to last?
It's so interesting. It's like rewind the tape 3 years. I mean, that one tweet with nothing else got people talking about stocks, got people online talking about the stocks they want to buy, started to put their own memes and pictures of them buying certain stocks, and boom, like wildfire, it just spread. So this is hype. It's like speculation. It's get rich quick. It's not really investing, but it is a whole kind of community of gamer traders, I guess, on Reddit and social media who try to drive these things up for fun and sometimes for profit.
For people watching at home who are like, okay, so should I buy shares in BlackBerry? You are not their financial advisor. You cannot answer that question, I know. But how should we be thinking of this in a more long-term way, or should we not be thinking about this long-term at all?
This is really a game. This is all here a game. I mean, you have to, when you buy a stock, you should look at the fundamentals of the stock and decide if it's got a good company, that the stock is going to grow. And, you know, one of the reasons why this became so popular, there was also this other element, not just the get rich quick, but also like the stick it to Wall Street, right? People thought that they were turning the tables on the Wall Street hedge funds. The little guy was going to win, the democratization of Wall Street. But I spoke with Spencer Jacob, Wall Street Journal editor of the Heard on the Street column, and he wrote a book about this. And a big reminder here. This is what he said.
I think people never really kind of got the message that the brokers and the market makers, even most hedge funds, really liked what happened. I mean, big companies like Morgan Stanley had record quarters when the original meme stock squeeze happened, because it's really profitable. It doesn't matter what happens.
Wall Street always wins, I think, is the bottom line.
Which is, I mean, that's it, right? Has Roaring Kitty posted any? It's, first of all, like, I'm literally asking a question about Roaring Kitty in a completely serious way. Like, let's just acknowledge the bizarreness of that. Roaring Kitty, this guy hasn't posted anything else, right? It's just that one meme.
That's all I've seen. And even that meme, I had to ask a gamer friend, what does that mean? And that is a gamer getting serious about what he's doing.
Yeah, getting like psyched. Right. Christine Romans, it is fascinating. Do you think we'll be talking about this again tomorrow, or do you think this fades out?
I don't think it has as much legs as last time around, but we'll see.
Well, we'd love to talk to you any day, so maybe come back. Christine, thank you so much. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Western Bureau, a Denver appeals court is now hearing arguments from members of a sorority at the University of Wyoming challenging the admission of a transgender woman. In the lawsuit, 6 members of Kappa Kappa Gamma's local chapter asked a judge to void her membership and award some kind of damages. Sorority leaders already rejected revoking her admission, and a lower court judge threw out the case last year before this appeal, so TBD on how that goes. Out of our Southern Bureau, a Florida principal now arrested after trapping a student in a room for nearly an hour and physically abusing him after he says the child indicated wanting to harm himself. You can see it here in surveillance video from the classroom. Principal Dante Akeem Prophet sitting on top of the child, at one point putting him in a chokehold. The principal now faces multiple charges, including aggravated child abuse. He was also fired. And out of our Western Bureau, this is the video out of California with firefighters rescuing a dog stuck in a wall. Can you kind of see that? That's Faye. There she is. She's stranded. She crawled into the wall through like a little plumbing door, but then got stuck under the bathtub for 2 hours. Fortunately, those hero firefighters saved the day for one very good girl. Coming up, the controversy and maybe chaos even headed toward Cannes, and it's not about the movies. We've got that in just a sec. The Cannes Film Festival starting tonight could end up the latest protest flashpoint over the war between Israel and Hamas. But Cannes Festival organizers are saying not so fast after demonstrations threw a big wrench in some of the year's other big events like the Oscars, Eurovision, the Met Gala, and of course commencement ceremonies around the country. Cannes is outright banning demonstrations in the area around the festival, with organizers saying they're not going to tolerate any form of protest on their red carpet, even from the world-famous attendees. It's all happening as folks online are turning up the heat on celebrities who haven't said anything about their stance on that war in Gaza, with a so-called block list picking up some steam. That's a list made up of online influencers and celebrities who are not being vocal about the war, the idea being to put pressure on these folks to either speak or be unfollowed by the thousands. NBC's Maura Barrett is covering this one for us. So let's start with what's happening at Cannes. It's just starting tonight, so we don't know how it's going to go. But we do know that the film festival is not exactly a stranger to protests related to politics. They've seen it even back in 2018. There was a coordinated red carpet demonstration against gender inequality. In 2022, organizers put in a video from the Ukrainian president to the opening ceremony. Talk about why this specific issue seems to be looked at in a bit of a different light and what steps they're taking here.
They're definitely trying to put the guardrails in place for this. They've banned those protests, as you mentioned, for the entire 11 days of the festival. They're enacting very severe security strategies like new AI security guards when you go through. So it's AI-powered security gates, essentially. And they're also adding in private security. They also backtracked on allowing Arab filmmakers to wear pins showing support for the Palestinians. This was something that's a small form of protest that they originally were going to allow, but they've now backtracked on that. That's also not allowed. So the festival chief is saying that this is to ensure the festival's main interest, which is going to be cinema. And so whether or not that's going to work remains a question as all of this unfolds today. But as we're already seeing videos and reports of a protest happening in the immediate area, it wasn't around the war, but we're seeing that it was workers at the festival protesting pay. But it kind of goes to show how effective or ineffective this could be. As to why this is an issue now, Hallie, as you pointed out, they've seen protests at this film festival before, and this is something that is common in the artistic space a lot of the times, but it goes to suggest that this war has become so divisive in the movie industry, in culture as a whole, that filmmakers, the organizers are really concerned about how that could play out. Now, they can't say anything about what people are posting online, though. We've already seen one of the jurors for Cannes post on Instagram, Omar Sy. He said he's urging elected leaders to take action to try and stop Israel's ground offensive in Rafah. And so this is something that's going to percolate throughout the festival. And so it depends on what we'll see happen online that goes and tries to happen in person as well, Hallie.
Maura, let's talk about this block list, right, that we mentioned at the introduction there, because we've seen some of these protests against celebrities, like, so, for example, at the Met Gala, right? That was a big thing at the end of last week with, I think, some demonstrators seeing it as a symbol of unnecessary excess at a time when people in Gaza are quite literally starving. So, for example, there was this one influencer wearing this Marie Antoinette-inspired dress, it seemed, lip-syncing the words, "Let them eat cake," things like that, that some perceive as kind of totally tone-deaf at this moment, that's making folks want to ramp up the pressure on these celebs. It feels like that's what's behind this so-called block list.
Right, and fans are calling this, it seems pretty fitting in referring to the Marie Antoinette reference, they're calling it a digital guillotine. Fans want to cut off any of the celebrities that they like, they say that they gave the platforms to by supporting them, encouraging them. They want to cut them off by unfollowing them, blocking them, not giving them the engagement of liking or commenting on their content until they come out and speak out about the war. Now, when you look at the reality of the numbers here, when Kim Kardashian gets cut off, 160,000 followers, or Beyonce, a similar kind of number when they have hundreds of millions of followers. It really isn't a huge dent in that sense. But, you know, it is telling in terms of what people are looking for from the people that they admire. Now, the pressure does seem to be working, though, in certain situations. We saw Lizzo, who we all know, come out, and influencer Chris Olsen come out and speak out saying, since the digital guillotine pressure was put on, they've said and supported and asked their followers to go and support those who are suffering in Gaza. And so then you have the altercations after the fact there of some fans saying, hey, this is too late. You've been silent for over a year. But some fans are saying, hey, now our movement is working. The pressure we're putting on is working. And so there's always going to be this divisive content that we're seeing in relation to the war. But this is just an interesting turn in terms of how people are calling on celebrities that they love to speak out about causes that they love. Hallie.
Laura Barrett, thank you very much. We'll see how it goes at Cannes over the course of the next few days. Appreciate it. Coming up, after all the hype, it is game on for Caitlin Clark. We are live in Connecticut for her first WNBA tip-off just hours before it happens. That's coming up. We are just hours, nay, minutes away from Caitlin Clark's WNBA regular season debut tonight with her Indiana Fever facing off against the Connecticut Sun in the season opener. And guess what? It is a totally sold-out game. That's the first time that's happened for the Sun since 2003. I'm going to tell you who Caitlin Clark is. I probably don't have to because you probably already know. She's the all-time scoring leader, man or woman, right? She's the #1 scorer in college basketball, and she's drawing record audiences. Her 2 straight Final Four appearances playing for Iowa. And the broadcast of the WNBA draft, where she was the first overall pick, was the highest rated WNBA broadcast. That includes games, by the way. So game, draft, whatever, in more than 2 decades. It's monster, right? She's helping to drive a ton of momentum for the WNBA, which is something that I talked about with the league's commissioner when we sat down one-on-one. Listen. I love the story about your son, what he said last night to you about
in an NBA game, one of the players hit like a logo 3, and he said, Mom, that was like a Caitlin Clark 3. So people are paying attention to the style and the game that our players are playing.
NBC's Stephanie Gosk is courtside at the Mohegan Sun Arena in Connecticut. Are those going to be your seats for the game, Steph? Like, that's it?
Oh, no, sadly. This is just a temporary privilege, which is kind of cool because both the teams are warming up. I mean, that's Caitlin Clark right there. I mean, I could just sort of run out and shake her hand if I wanted to. You know. We've been watching the people pile into this arena, and, you know, you see kids, parents with Iowa shirts on, Indiana Fever shirts. None of them are from Indiana or Iowa. They are just excited to come here and see this game. And it's that kind of energy that you feel all over this arena right now. I had a chance to talk to some of the parents, the moms, the daughters, the basketball players about why they were here. Listen to what one of them said to me.
She just finished her 5th year playing for University of Lynchburg. And to sit in the stands as a parent and see that, you know, they're not even a quarter filled. And then you look at the Iowa team and you see what she's brought to the game and the interest in women's basketball. It's unbelievable.
You know, we've been talking a lot about the new fans, Hallie, that have come to the WNBA or come to women's basketball because of Caitlin Clark. But I want to also talk about the fans that have always been here, that have had season tickets for years, or the people who have supported the WNBA for years and years. This is their moment as well, because they have been working hard to get this sport the recognition that it deserves, and they feel like they're finally on the cusp of that happening, Hallie.
Okay, on the cusp, right, which is an interesting turn of phrase, Steph, because I think there's a big question right now as to the momentum that the WNBA is feeling and how they hold on to it. Because one of the things that came up in my conversation with the WNBA commissioner was this idea that she's been laying the foundation in case of a moment like this one. Well, now they've caught lightning in the bottle. How do you keep that going?
All right, well, first of all, don't put the lightning in the bottle. Put the lightning on the court. And that's what they're doing. And ultimately, that's what's got to happen. That excitement, that game, people are going to come and watch and have a different appreciation for the way that women play this sport as compared to the way that men play this sport. And, you know, we see that in a number of other different sports. Think about how we watch tennis, for instance. You know, women and men play the games differently. There is a certain kind of art to the way women play this game that is different than the way men play. So get the eyeballs, get the attention. You know, what's interesting about this is there's so much talk about Caitlin Clark, and I've had the opportunity to speak to her a couple of times, including today, and what's remarkable is how cool she remains. Listen to this soundbite from earlier today.
Caitlin, it feels like we were just at the draft, and now you're here. That's not a lot of time with the team. How's it feeling?
I mean, I'm excited. I think this is the best way to do it. Just get out there and go for it. You know, it doesn't really feel like my first game. Like, I feel like it's just kind of another basketball game that you prepare for in the same way you always have.
I mean, just another basketball game, right? Like, she's totally nonplussed by any of this. And it's probably what makes her so amazing at this game, is that even with all this pressure and all this attention, she just loves to play. She is so grounded, Hallie.
I'm obsessed with that. Just another game. Is she still out there behind you, Steph? I can't tell on our monitor here. Do you see her? All right, that's all right.
No, but she wasn't, you know, earlier she was just hitting threes. Just hitting them. I mean, I don't know. What was it? Like,
well, you get
15 out of 6.
You can relate.
Yeah, we were just sitting there, like, in awe. Oh, yeah. Oh, of course I can. It was wonderful in my day.
I so hope that you get a chance to are you going to watch the game? And I just want to know real quick, if you can tell me.
We are going to watch the game. It's going to be super fun. I'm excited.
I'm super, super excited for you. We'll be looking at your Instagram or whatever for those snaps. Steph, thank you so much. Stephanie Gosk, have fun. Appreciate it. That does it for us for this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now. We are coming on the air tonight with the star witness back on the stand in an explosive day of cross-examination. We'll break down all the questions, all the fireworks, even some of the name-calling between Michael Cohen and Donald Trump's attorneys, with one of our reporters who watched it all from inside that room. Then the bus crash, killing at least 8 farm workers on their way to their job. And that number may go up as police say they've made a key arrest. Our team's on the ground. We're going to take you there live. Plus, just into us, a long-anticipated report giving some new answers about that deadly bridge collapse in Baltimore and the warning sign that may have been missed hours before the crash. Then the deadly tornadoes and flash floods ripping through parts of the South. We're going to tell you who's at risk tonight and why nearly 500,000 people are being forced to leave their homes in one of the biggest cases of climate migration ever. That's coming up later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and with Donald Trump's historic criminal trial, this particular phase of it may be coming close to an end. We're learning tonight he may not end up on the stand at all after an explosive day with a tough to follow at times cross-examination of the prosecution's star witness. That's Michael Cohen, who prosecutors think can connect the dots between that $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels for her silence about an alleged affair. One that, of course, Mr. Trump denies. And today, it got a little personal. The Trump attorney Todd Blanche asking Cohen if he called Mr. Trump a crying little blank or called him a crying little blank. He said, sounds like something I would say. He said, did you refer to Donald Trump as a dictator D-bag? Cohen says, sounds like something I'd say. Apparently, Blanche has been preparing for this cross for months, according to a source. And over, he seemed to be trying to get a rise out of Cohen. At one point, asking him point blank, do you want to see Mr. Trump convicted? Cohen said, sure. And even while it was personal, we so far haven't heard much that got to the heart of the charges here in this case. Cohen's allegation that he paid Stormy Daniels at Mr. Trump's direction so that her story would not affect Mr. Trump's chances of becoming president of the United States. That's really the crux of it here. Cohen's also trying to appeal to a jury, perhaps, that's already heard a whole lot about how he's a liar. Getting personal himself, saying that he has regrets, that he violated his own moral compass, and that he suffered the penalty. Now, in just the last 90 minutes or so, 2 hours, when we saw the former president leave court, he did not bring up Cohen. He may not end up speaking at all in court. His lawyer is saying he may call up one expert, but other than that, it's probably it. So this means Cohen is probably the last big voice we'll hear in this trial, because prosecutors also say they're done after him. So timeline-wise, what does it mean? Look at the calendar. Probably going to have Cohen on Thursday. That's what Todd Blanche, again, the former president's lead attorney, says. He's going to continue to cross Cohen then. Friday, no court because the Former president's son is graduating high school. So maybe they wrap up and get to closings. We could have that as soon as Monday, perhaps. It means we may get a felony on these 34, or a verdict on these 34 felony counts before Memorial Day. We got the politics of it all with Vaughn Hilliard, who is in the room, but I want to start with Laura Jarrett, who was also inside court today. So what's interesting here, let's talk about this. A lot of ways that the defense was trying to go after Michael Cohen's credibility here. Less so going after what is at the heart of this case and these 34 counts against the former president. How do you see it? What did it feel like to you?
It was a curious strategy, Hallie. He basically, Todd Blanche, the lead defense lawyer, had sort of a grab bag approach here. There were so many possible motives in the defense's view for Michael Cohen to lie, whether it was fame, fortune. The idea that he wanted to get out of prison early, so he was digging up dirt on Trump years ago. The idea that he was almost a jilted ex-boyfriend who was cast aside when Trump didn't need him anymore. There were so many different motives that the jury he was offering could choose from, potentially, for why they shouldn't believe Cohen. But we didn't hear nary a word about the falsification of business records that Cohen spent the better part of the morning walking through the jury. Every single check, every single invoice the prosecutors say was false. We haven't heard anything about that on cross-examination yet, Hallie, although it's not over.
Right, more to come on Thursday. Remember, Cohen told prosecutors, too, at one point that he lied about the Stormy Daniels payment. I want to pull up that graphic here to, quote, protect Mr. Trump, to stay on message, to demonstrate continued loyalty. And you saw the defense, as we pull up the quote-unquote web of lies that Cohen has acknowledged here. The defense's strategy seemed to be to paint Cohen as almost obsessed with Donald Trump, to paint him as this guy who was out for revenge because he was so angry, right? It felt intentional, but as you also point out, it was also kind of tough to follow at times. Why would Blanche take that tactic?
Because there's so much to cross him on. There's so much fodder here for the defense. There's any number of different ways to do it. But the problem is, for all of us who've been following this case for years so closely, if we're finding it challenging, then you better believe the jury's finding it challenging, because most of them have not been following it so closely. And so I think he was maybe perhaps struggling to find his footing on certain lines of questioning here. And instead of just going play by play, okay, here now we're going to do the money, now we're going to do the fame and fortune. Instead, it was just all over the place, Hallie. And so we'll see if he has a different strategy on Thursday.
What's also been made clear, even though the former president suggested that he might want to testify on his own behalf in this trial, doesn't sound like that's the case, considering what Blanche said today in court. That means this timeline is moving pretty quickly.
Yeah, and he was never going to testify. The amount of cross-examination there would have been insurmountable. It was always highly unlikely. A lot of skepticism around him testifying, even though he said he wanted to. I think that we could very well see this case wrap up early next week. Of course, once Todd Blanche finishes his cross, the prosecution will get a chance to come back for what's known as redirect, to try to rehabilitate anything that Cohen said that was problematic on cross. So it won't wrap up this week, but it could easily be next week, Hallie.
Laura Jarrett, there for all of it, every minute. Laura, thank you so much. Vaughn Hilliard has also been there for all of it in court today. And to channel perhaps a famous SNL character here, New York's hottest club is that downtown Manhattan courtroom, right? If you are a Republican loyal to Donald Trump. No less than the House Speaker, Mike Johnson himself, showed up today, along with the North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, potential VP candidate pick, right? Former Republican opponent Vivek Ramaswamy, Florida Congressman Byron Donalds. This is after we saw others in court yesterday. Is this a Republican roll call?
Especially if you want to potentially be the vice president of the United States under Donald Trump. Look, I mean, you've got Doug Burgum as well as J.D. Vance, we should note, was in the courtroom yesterday. Both of those are individuals are under consideration to be the VP. Speaker Mike Johnson coming up from Washington to lower Manhattan to go and attack the credibility of Michael Cohen, something that Donald Trump can't do himself under the gag order. You know, it was notable that there were several weeks that went by without really any notable Republicans coming to Donald Trump's defense inside of that courthouse. Of course, Melania Trump, the former first lady, hasn't been there either. But by contrast, over the last couple days, it's been a little different scene in lower Manhattan. Take a listen to a few of the folks who were here today.
It's election interference, and it's tying up the president from being out on the campaign trail.
This is a travesty of justice. This is a misuse of the justice system.
That is not justice. That is a bastardization of what this country was founded on.
So inside of the courthouse, unless he defends himself and takes the stand, Hallie, Donald Trump won't be able to talk about this trial largely and about the witnesses. And so what you saw here are Republicans coming to his defense outside of the courthouse, speaking on his behalf.
The veep of it all is also interesting here because the former president was asked about this on a radio show, and I want to play his answer, which was somewhat notable. We'll listen.
A lot of people are in play, and I'm really a believer that you do it during the convention. I'm also, unfortunately, a believer that historically VPs, I don't think ever have helped. I think they can hurt a little bit, but they haven't helped.
It is not breaking news to suggest that Mr. Trump is not in love with his last vice presidential pick in Mike Pence, given what went down between the two of them. How do you see this? And what are you hearing from your sources as it relates to the VP race? Because this is not the first time that Donald Trump has suggested he may not make his pick until like July, right before the convention. Right.
Number one, Mike Pence would probably disagree with the idea that he did not help Donald Trump in the 2016 campaign, especially shoring up support among some evangelicals, but also the Midwestern states. He won Wisconsin and Michigan, neighbors of Indiana. And so, now for Donald Trump, I've been told that, look, Donald Trump is keeping his mind open and nobody will know until ultimately he makes the call. But there's not a clear front runner here for this. And so right now there's a lot of litmus tests at play, and there's several allies that are at least playing the political game and coming to lower Manhattan, New York, and as part of that to try to win over the former president and potential future president, Hallie.
Just real quick, we know he's got a fundraiser tonight in New York. He's also repeatedly said he wants to be on the campaign trail, not in court, as he is obviously required to be unless there's a special exception. What does his schedule look like over the next few days? Because he's also got his son's high school graduation.
There's a fundraising deficit right now for the Trump campaign compared to the Biden campaign. They need to make money. That's what they're doing tonight. He's got the high school graduation for Barron on Friday. He's got a campaign event later that night. Of course, we've then got a Memorial Day a week later, but this trial could very well wrap up next week, and the campaign season could be upon it for Donald Trump.
We'll see. Von Hilliard, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We got to get to some breaking news now out of Florida, where we're learning that the driver of a pickup truck that crashed with a bus full of farm workers is now facing criminal charges for allegedly driving under the influence. I want to show you the aftermath now of that crash. You see, that's the bus flipped on its side. And then you're about to see, there it is, the pickup truck it collided with. It's all banged up. 8 people were killed. 7 are in critical condition. Dozens of others were also hurt with non-life-threatening injuries, according to local officials. The Florida Highway Patrol says it happened pretty early this morning when the bus and the pickup truck collided. The bus went off the road, through a fence, hit a tree, tipped over. Sam Brock is following this one for us. Sam, we heard from hospital officials today saying that a lot of the victims that did survive are still in shock, understandably. What else do we know?
Sure. So the majority of the victims did survive, Hallie. That is the good news. But you're talking about 53 people who were on board of that bus. It has since been moved over my shoulder right now. It was struck by that pickup truck that's currently in a ditch. That is about to be towed. And we are under the impression, according to authorities, that this all started, as you said, at 6:30 in the morning, that the driver of that truck veered into the center lane of State Road 40, which is this country road by where we're standing right now, struck the bus, sent it careening into a fence and then into a field. There were hours-long rescues going on from investigators on the scene here and first responders. It was in that field, which is now empty, over my shoulder. It took them several hours to rescue everyone. 8 people have been pronounced dead. They were dead on scene. Another 7, Hallie, are in critical condition right now. There were dozens that were taken to the hospital for treatment. As we take this look at images from earlier today, you see the bus there on its side. There was initially, Hallie, confusion because it's a school bus, that this could have involved children. However, it's a retired school bus, which we soon learned, carrying migrant workers. The Mexican consulate has just spoken this afternoon. We're going to find out exactly how many of them were Mexican nationals. But the reality is you are talking about dozens upon dozens of people who are just trying to do their job. And now at least 8 of them are dead. And that death toll is expected to climb, Hallie.
Talk about the driver of this pickup truck now facing some pretty serious charges. Where does that investigation go from here?
He's 41 years old. His name is Brian Howard. It is a 6-month investigation, according to the Florida Highway Patrol. But we do know this. He's facing 8 counts of DUI manslaughter. And his history, Hallie, included things like fleeing the scene of a crash, grand theft auto, driving on a suspended license multiple times. So there was a history there. Now, of course, he is facing charges in light of the death of at least 8 people. That is the backstory. And as you had mentioned earlier, this is also the most fatal cause of death, most frequent and fatal cause of death for farm workers nationally, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. more of them die from traffic incidents than anything else. Why that might be, whether it's safety gaps that exist in terms of just protocols, whether it's early in the morning. We talked about the fact this happened at 6:30 a.m. or just rural areas where the roads maybe are not prepared for a lot of movement, especially when it's in season. All of those things adding up. As yet, absolutely horrific incident here. It's our understanding as well that right now some of the survivors are in a local motel about 15 or 20 minutes away from here in Gainesville, trying to process what they've just experienced and trying, Hallie, to reach their families.
Sam Brock, live for us there in Florida. Sam, thank you very much for the update. We've got more breaking news tonight coming to us out of Baltimore with some new answers as to what happened in that catastrophic, deadly bridge collapse, and a new NTSB report revealing for the first time that the cargo ship that crashed into one of the pillars at the base of that bridge, that it had experienced a power outage hours before that collision even happened. Remember, 6 construction workers were killed when the dolly collided with the bridge. NBC's Ryan Nobles is following this one for us tonight. Ryan, we knew, I think at the time that this bridge collapse happened, or at least in the days immediately following it, that the dolly ship seemed to have lost power, made it tough to steer. It ended up colliding with the bridge. Now there's this new information revealed for the first time in this new report that suggests that was not even the first power outage of its kind that day for the dolly. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. I was here hours after this bridge collapsed, and it seemed within the minutes after it came down, internet sleuths were already trying to figure out what went wrong, and many of them at that time were diagnosing that it looked as though the ship was experiencing a power outage. And what this report does demonstrate is that there was a power outage. In fact, multiple power outages, and one that took place 10 hours before the ship experienced this terrible accident, before it even left on this long voyage that it was expected to take across the Atlantic Ocean. And then on that day, the day that it moved out of the port of Baltimore, there were 2 separate power outages, one that took place 4 minutes before the crash, and then a second that took place just 2 minutes before the crash when it was only 350 yards away from this bridge. And why that made it difficult was because there's just not enough time to stop the ship or to get tugboats here in time to steer it away from the base of the bridge. Hallie?
What is the next step here in this investigation? We've talked, Ryan, about how there are 21 crew members who were on board that ship. They had been waiting for this demolition of a steel beam. It was going to be lifted off. The ship was going to be able to be cleared out of the river, et cetera, et cetera. But this investigation has been going on. Those crew members had to stay on board. What's next?
Yeah, so as you can see, the ship is still there. It hasn't moved. We thought when high tide came today that we thought that it would be moved out. That hasn't happened quite yet. We would assume that's because they're still working to remove the debris to allow the ship to move out comfortably and without any issue. There was also some weather here today. They're hoping, Hallie, they can begin the process of removing the ship tomorrow.
Ryan Nobles live for us there in Baltimore. Ryan, thank you. The White House tonight taking a big swing at China in this tense trade war between the world's 2 biggest economies, with President Biden announcing some big tariff hikes on things like EVs, Chinese imports. The president saying he wants to protect American industries from what he says are unfair trade practices coming out of Beijing. And he'd taken the opportunity, too, to take a little dig, take a swipe at the guy who preceded him, former President Trump. Listen.
Mr. President, Trump said today China is eating our lunch. What do you say in response? He said China is eating our lunch. That's what Trump said today. We've been feeding them a long time.
Here, a reporter yelled, he says China's eating our lunch. President Biden says Donald Trump's been feeding him a long time. Now, the White House says the tariff rate for EVs will quadruple and that tariffs on other things like steel, aluminum, EV batteries, medical products could triple in some cases. China obviously not happy about that. The Chinese Foreign Ministry says it'll take necessary measures. That's a quote, quote unquote, necessary measures in response. What are they? Sounds cryptic. We'll see. Monica Alba is joining us now from outside the White House. So critics say, listen, hiking tariffs could backfire and end up having people pay more for stuff. The Biden administration says, wait a second, that's not the case. Why not?
Exactly, Hallie. And there is this rising concern about could this increase inflation, which is something that many voters are constantly citing as something that they worry about when they talk about the economy and how they may make up their mind in 2024. But from a policy perspective, the Biden administration is saying they need to take these steps to protect American workers, businesses and manufacturers. And they say that this is a more targeted approach, that it's specifically going to focus on $18 billion worth of Chinese goods. You mentioned the electric vehicles. Certainly you're going to see that continue with steel, aluminum, semiconductors. And what's really notable here is this response, of course, from China, which was expected from the administration. They sort of had a rebuttal to this. But they're saying that they think this violates World Trade Organizations. But the White House is firing back and saying essentially they believe China is cheating, that this isn't fair, and it's something that needs to be called out right now. Hallie.
This is only the latest sort of back and forth in this trade war between the U.S. and China, and the backdrop is obviously this election season that we are in right now, where both candidates have tried to show that they can be kind of tough on China here.
And it was former President Trump, remember, who increased the prices, who introduced some of these tariffs on China when he was in office. And he actually responded to this today saying it doesn't go far enough. And the Trump team has even suggested they would like to introduce a 10% tariff on all imports, not just those that come from China. But for his part, remember, candidate Joe Biden had actually been critical of some of these tariffs. He had said that some of them were senseless. He had explored whether he was going to roll some of them back. Notably, he didn't reverse those that were put in place. But this is an ongoing conversation within the administration that's been taking place now for years. They actually debated whether to do this earlier in the term, instead deciding they needed to do it now because of the economic picture. And absolutely, there are political implications to these decisions. And the Biden team, the re-election effort, they're hoping that that will show in some key battleground states. Hallie.
Monica Alva live for us there just outside the White House. Thanks, Mon. Let's take you overseas, where right now the Secretary of State is making a surprise visit to Ukraine. He's in Kyiv to try to remind Ukrainians that the U.S. has not forgotten about him. Here's Secretary Tony Blinken a little earlier.
I have come to Ukraine with a message. You are not alone. The United States has been by your side from day one. We are with you today, and we will stay by your side.
The visit's happening as Russia is making some big gains lately, both in the north and in the east of Ukraine. NBC's Josh Letterman is following all of this for us tonight. Josh, listen, Secretary Blinken is clearly there to give a little TLC to Ukrainian allies here. But why now? I mean, Congress just approved $60 billion in more aid, new help to Ukraine, something that the president, Volodymyr Zelensky, had been desperately seeking. What's with the timing here?
Well, I don't think we can sugarcoat this, Hallie. This is a really dark moment for Ukraine in this war. After a long period that was essentially a stalemate, they are losing ground. The front line is moving, and it's moving in the wrong direction for the Ukrainians. And while they are getting some of that aid that had long been promised by the Biden administration, Secretary Blinken acknowledged the fact that the lengthy delay in getting Congress to approve that had left Ukraine's security and defense vulnerable. And not only that, but they are facing a real numbers problem. As this war drags on, they are finding they simply don't have the number of troops that they need to replenish their forces on the front lines. Russia, a country many times the size in population, is able to continue to throw more and more people at this war in a way that Ukraine is not. And so there was a real need right now for the Biden administration to reassure Ukraine, especially given the awareness that the focus has kind of shifted publicly to the war in Israel. If you look at Secretary Blinken's travel schedule, he has paid 7 visits to the Middle East just since the Israel-Hamas war started, compared to only 2 visits to Ukraine since that war started more than a year earlier. And so this was a real attempt by the Biden administration to show that not only is aid coming now, but more will be coming in the future, as well as diplomatic support. Some of that aid is already on the ground and has made it to the front lines, according to U.S. officials. That includes long-range ballistic missiles. It includes air defense and artillery. More is on the way. And Secretary Blinken also importantly announcing the U.S. intends to take some of the seized Russian assets that have been frozen as a result of sanctions and actually make it available to Ukraine. Blinken saying the U.S. is working with G7 countries and with Congress to make sure that happens in order to provide some funding for the reconstruction of Ukraine, which, of course, is going to cost many, many billions of dollars, given the immense amount of damage that's taken place over the last couple of years during this war, Hallie.
Josh Letterman live for us overseas. Some significant developments today. Josh, thank you. Back here at home down south, millions of people are dealing with these major cleanup efforts after deadly tornadoes ripped through Louisiana overnight. We now know they've killed at least 4 people, including a pregnant woman and her unborn child. Just look at some of the damage here. Cars totally flipped over, a gas station destroyed, roads filled with downed trees, scraps of metal from damaged buildings, something like 60,000 people still in the dark tonight. All of it's coming after huge tornadoes. You see one there, and more severe weather on the way with 20 million more folks at risk. I want to bring in meteorologist Bill Cairns now. How bad is it going to get for people who have already been through a lot?
It's not like the last couple of nights. We're not going to see that. We'll have isolated people losing power. And by the way, the picture we just showed you there from Sulphur, Louisiana, that was an EF3 tornado, 145-mile-per-hour winds. I mean, that was like serious tornado. It was only on the ground for a short period of time, but it did its damage. So here's the areas of concern tonight. One is Florida, which is fine now. These storms are actually going to hit you during the middle of the night and into tomorrow. And then this area we here have in Tennessee and also northern portions of Mississippi and Alabama. Severe thunderstorm watches up until 8 o'clock. I left Columbia on there because they had an EF4 tornado that they dealt with about a week and a half ago, and they just had the severe line of storms go through, but there was no tornadoes or anything like that. Nashville, you're doing okay right now. Just some heavy rain on the south side of town here with some lightning strikes. This area of this bowing out here, this is where we could see some wind damage possible. We'll track this through Murfreesboro. It's heading now through Shelbyville. You see that bright pink down at the bottom there. There's probably some large hail with that storm, too. Tomorrow, the threat, we have it in 2 spots. One, I just mentioned, starts tonight in Florida, goes throughout the day tomorrow. And then also we'll see storms returning to the Central Plains, especially Oklahoma. And we do have an isolated tornado threat tomorrow. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because obviously this covers a huge population centers from Tampa to Sarasota, up the I-4 corridor, through the Orlando area, just about to Daytona Beach. So we'll track that for you tomorrow, Hallie. But tonight is not like the last couple nights, and that's a sigh of relief.
Yeah, no kidding, especially for the folks in that area. Bill Cairns, thank you. Coming up here on the show, how a fake obit for a super famous alter ego ended up in a newspaper. But first, why those super competitive AI wars are heating up tonight. What we've just heard from the head of Google, next. What influencer culture has to do with the rise of raw milk, even with a bunch of warnings not to drink it. We'll get to that in just a second. But first, the AI wars. Man, they've been heating up, with Google tonight announcing what it says is its most efficient AI model, just a day after OpenAI announced its own version. Google CEO saying late today, this is just the beginning to show what this tech can do.
These are all agentic directions. Very early days. We're going to be able to do a lot more. I think that's what makes this moment one of the most exciting I've seen in my life.
Google's now launching Gemini 1.5 Pro, which the company says can summarize conversations really quickly, create captions for pictures and videos, and even take out some key information from big documents. Google's not the only one showing off just how advanced some of these AI models are becoming. OpenAI rolled out its latest version of ChatGPT's voice assistants. Like, I know this is a lot, but here's what you should know about this one, that people are kind of having a bit of a melt. They're kind of having a brain moment because of how it sounds, what it can do. Listen.
But I want a little bit more emotion in your voice, a little bit more drama.
Got it. Let's add some drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours, there was a robot named Byte.
No, ChatGPT. I really want maximal emotion, like maximal expressiveness, much more than you were doing before.
Understood. Let's amplify the drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours.
Brian Chung is joining us now. Are we gazing into our future?
I mean, I guess. And by the way, Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, he tweeted the word her after that demo, referring to that Joaquin Phoenix movie. Well, and a lot of people were saying, like, doesn't that kind of sound like Scarlett Johansson? So I guess clearly the influences are there, perhaps. But look, AI is getting smarter. And I think the big takeaway here is that other companies are trying to compete in this space. We talk about Google unveiling their Gemini products earlier on today. So this is escalating very quickly. When you look at the capabilities of what we're talking about here, this is a different landscape than when it seemed like the conversation over AI peaked, which was about 2022, right, when ChatGPT came out. But if you look at the features, what we're talking about here are things like live translations, right? Gemini able to handle 35 languages, OpenAI handling 50 languages. We're talking about a faster speed by which they can respond to some of these prompts. Google trying to offer this as a plugin to Google Drive and Gmail, where it can read thousands of pages at a time to summarize things. They can take a look at 100 emails and say, here's the general thread of all of that. So AI is really evolving at a breakneck pace. It's not just text to video or text to photo. We're really seeing these types of applications really get out there and very quickly, Hallie.
So is this the next level in these AI sort of wars, battles, whatever? I mean, is this, it feels like it's Google, ChatGPT, those are the big names, but there's a lot of people that are trying to make inroads here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the real challenge here is how do you turn this into something that's not just a cool party trick, right? Because, okay, yeah, you can go on to ChatGPT and ask a few cool questions, but look, we have 5 different companies that are in the race here that are trying to get into the customer's phone on a daily basis. You have OpenAI, Google's Gemini, Microsoft's Copilot, Meta's Llama, and Anthropic as well, and they're all kind of commingled to each other. We have to remember that OpenAI, they have investment from Microsoft, Anthropic, they have investment from Microsoft and Google as well, so everyone's trying to stake each other's flag in each other's property. But look, the big picture here is how do you get people like your mom or your dad to use the AI? Gemini, as part of the unveil today, they had Project Astro, which is kind of a demo in the future. It's not something that's going to be unveiled on your phone now, but basically the idea is you open up an app on your phone and you just kind of show the camera what you're seeing in real life. Hey, did I leave my glasses somewhere in the other room? Hey, what is the way to make sure that I can actually fix this broken microwave here? Hey, how can I take this math problem from my kid's homework and solve it faster than the professor can? So these are questions that they're trying to answer to really increase the uptake of this technology, and we'll have to see. Whoever can do that first might be the winner of this AI war.
Super interesting. Brian Chung, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, an American man finally detained in France after a 3-year-long search. He's accused of sexually assaulting a Pennsylvania college student back in 2013 and then sending her a Facebook message that said, "So I raped you." French prosecutors confirming the man is now in custody before he's potentially set to be extradited back to the U.S. Number 2, Canadian literary giant Alice Munro has died at the age of 92, her publisher confirmed today. She was one of history's most honored short story writers and won the Nobel Literary Prize in 2013. Number 3, it looks like raw milk sales are on the rise, even with warnings about the health risks of it, and a bird flu outbreak in dairy cows. Sales of unpasteurized milk went up something like 60% in the weeks since the virus was confirmed in American cattle, according to a market research firm. Remember, the FDA and CDC say raw milk is one of the riskiest foods you can eat. Number 4, Spain's Maritime Rescue Service has an unknown number of orcas. So a group of orcas apparently sank a yacht in the Strait of Gibraltar, ramming the boat just off the coast of Morocco. 2 people were on board when it happened. A nearby oil tanker picked them up before the yacht sank. This is not the first time, right, that we've seen orcas go after ships. This is the first this season, however, in this area. Number 5, R.I.P. to the real Slim Shady. Fake obit put up in a Detroit paper for Slim Shady, who, of course, is Eminem's alter ego, all before the rapper's 12th album release this summer. It's a promotional stunt, right, for Eminem to promote his new music. Apparently, the whole vibe of the album is Eminem killing off the Slim Shady character, which, of course, is what really shot him to superstardom back in the early 2000s, as I'm sure most millennials are aware. Coming up, how one prisoner got away with a deadly plot to get out and what the plan is to catch him. Plus, more than 100 people dead, the water still rising. So many forced out of their homes. We're going to break down one of the world's worst cases of climate migration next. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our teams around the world have done it for you. Here's a look at what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of India, really intense thunderstorms in Mumbai collapsed this massive billboard. Look at that. It fell, killing at least 14 people, hurting dozens of others. The billboard fell into a gas station, flattening cars there in the parking lot. The rescue operations are still happening today. It's not clear how many people may still be trapped. Out of France, a manhunt happening for a group of attackers who shot and killed 2 prison officers and hurt 3 others while breaking somebody out. The group ended up escaping and helping a prisoner who was recently convicted of burglary. The country is now mobilizing hundreds of officers to look for the attackers and for the person who escaped. And out of Georgia, demonstrators, the country of Georgia, demonstrators protesting at Parliament today after lawmakers passed this really controversial bill on foreign influence. We've talked about this on the show before. The law mandates that media outlets and NGOs register as, quote unquote, pursuing the interests of a foreign power if they get more than 20% of their money from abroad. This has sparked some of the biggest demonstrations their country's ever seen. The president can still veto the bill, although Parliament can override. Tonight, some dramatic scenes out of Brazil where river levels are going up again after intense flooding in the southern part of the country. You can see cars and houses totally submerged, even a plane in water. Around 150 people have been killed. 500,000 have been forced to leave their homes. All of it shining a devastating spotlight on the rise of climate migration around the world. Maggie Vespa has our breakdown.
Tonight, chaos mounting in flood-ravaged Brazil, where as swollen rivers rise yet again, police patrol submerged streets desperate to stop looters. And the country's Olympic hopefuls leave qualifying tournaments early, giving up on lifelong dreams to return home and help victims. Brazilian officials say close to 150 people have died and roughly 130 are still missing in the widespread floods, which come after a similar round of flooding hit the area late last year, with more than 500,000 people displaced. Many, like Maria, are asking the same question. Is it time to flee the natural disasters hitting their homes? And in her words, do you buy another house somewhere else?
An intensifying climate means more hurricanes, more floods, more wildfires. Unlike in generations past, there's more people, and there's more people who are in harm's way.
It's called climate migration, and for decades, experts like Professor Pablo Bose at the University of Vermont have been warning it will become a massive and massively destabilizing global phenomenon. Now, amid the worsening floods, tornadoes, and wildfires of our man-made climate crisis, these warnings are coming to fruition, with the UN predicting climate fears will force 216 million people across 6 continents to move within their countries by 2050.
This is also something that affects us much, much closer to home.
In the U.S., one study estimates that in the past 2 decades, 3.2 million Americans have already moved from areas known for flooding, like parts of Florida and Texas.
Climate change is equal opportunity. It hits all sorts of places and it hits all sorts of people. It's not equal opportunity in terms of who feels the effects the most. It's overwhelmingly marginalized communities, indigenous populations.
Among the daunting questions officials face, what this trend will mean more broadly. The White House warning in a 2021 report mass climate migration could induce political instability and pose risks to food and water security. Experts pleading with officials to focus not only on the impacts, but also to zero in on root causes of this man-made crisis that more and more is truly hitting home.
There's bigger policy and cultural shifts that we have to do to really deal with the root causes of climate change, because what this is really dealing with the effects of it, not the causes.
Maggie Vespa is joining us now. So, Maggie, when you talk about these latest migration numbers here, with Brazil being really an example of this, what's happening there, talk about what the rest of the world can do to help, because obviously that is a call that often goes out at times of disasters like this.
Definitely. And in this case, if this is kind of like a test case that we're talking about, the response that we're seeing is kind of what we've seen in the past in situations like this. Case in point, President Biden putting out a statement over the weekend saying that his administration is in touch with their Brazilian partners to provide what they call necessary assistance to the Brazilian people. But it's important to remember that, you know, today, okay, we're talking about Brazil, but you heard from that scientist in our piece, and the scientific community is in complete agreement on this, that climate change is leaving no corner of the world untouched, and climate migration will be the same. They believe it will be a completely global phenomenon unless, like you heard in that piece, Hallie, the root causes of climate change, and we talk about this a lot, are addressed as soon as possible, meaning pretty much now. Hallie.
Maggie Vespa, thank you very much, Maggie. Coming up, the controversy and maybe chaos even already coming to Cannes, and it's not about the films. That's next. The Cannes Film Festival, starting tonight, could end up the latest protest flashpoint over the war between Israel and Hamas. But Cannes Festival organizers are saying not so fast after demonstrations threw a big wrench in some of the year's other big events like the Oscars, Eurovision, the Met Gala, and, of course, commencement ceremonies around the country. Cannes is outright banning demonstrations in the area around the festival, with organizers saying they're not going to tolerate any form of protest on their red carpet, even from the world-famous attendees. It's all happening as folks online are turning up the heat on celebrities who haven't said anything about their stance on that war in Gaza, with a so-called block list picking up some steam. That's a list made up of online influencers and celebrities who are not being vocal about the war, the idea being to put pressure on these folks to either speak or be unfollowed by the thousands. NBC's Maura Barrett is covering this one for us. So let's start with what's happening at Cannes. It's just starting tonight, so we don't know how it's going to go. But we do know that the film festival is not exactly a stranger to protests related to politics. They've seen it even back in 2018. There was a coordinated red carpet demonstration against gender inequality. In 2022, organizers put in a video from the Ukrainian president to the opening ceremony. Talk about why this specific issue seems to be looked at in a bit of a different light and what steps they're taking here.
They're definitely trying to put the guardrails in place for this. They've banned those protests, as you mentioned, for the entire 11 days of the festival. They're enacting very severe security strategies like new AI security guards that when you go through, so it's AI-powered security gates, essentially, and they're also adding in private security. They also backtracked on allowing Arab filmmakers to wear pins showing support for the Palestinians. This was something that's a small form of protest that they originally were going to allow, but they've now backtracked on that. That's also not allowed. So the festival chief is saying that this is to ensure the festival's main interest, which is going to be cinema. And so whether or not that's going to work remains a question as all of this unfolds today. But as we're already seeing videos and reports of a protest happening in the immediate area, it wasn't around the war, but we're seeing that it was workers at the festival protesting pay. But it kind of goes to show how effective or ineffective this could be. As to why this is an issue now, Hallie, as you pointed out, they've seen protests at this film festival before, and this is something that is common in the artistic space a lot of the times, but it goes to suggest that this war has become so divisive in the movie industry, in culture as a whole, that filmmakers, the organizers are really concerned about how that could play out. Now, they can't say anything about what people are posting online, though. We've already seen one of the jurors for Cannes post on Instagram, Omar Sy. He said he's urging elected leaders to take action to try and stop Israel's ground offensive in Rafah. And so this is something that's going to percolate throughout the festival. And so it depends on what we'll see happen online that goes and tries to happen in person as well, Hallie.
Maura, let's talk about this block list, right, that we mentioned at the introduction there, because we've seen some of these protests against celebrities, like, so, for example, at the Met Gala, right? That was a big thing at the end of last week with, I think, some demonstrators seeing it as a symbol of unnecessary excess at a time when people in Gaza are quite literally starving. So, for example, there was this one influencer wearing this Marie Antoinette-inspired dress, it seemed, lip-syncing the words, "Let them eat cake," things like that, that some perceive as kind of tonally tone-deaf at this moment, that's making folks want to ramp up the pressure on these celebs. It feels like that's what's behind this so-called block list.
Right, and fans are calling this, it seems pretty fitting in referring to the Marie Antoinette reference, they're calling it a digital guillotine. Fans want to cut off any of the celebrities that they like. They say that they gave the platforms to by supporting them, encouraging them. They want to cut them off by unfollowing them, blocking them, not giving them the engagement of liking or commenting on their content until they come out and speak out about the war. Now, when you look at the reality of the numbers here, when Kim Kardashian gets cut off, 160,000 followers, or Beyonce, a similar kind of number, when they have hundreds of millions of followers, it really isn't a huge dent in that sense. But, it is telling in terms of what people are looking for from the people that they admire. Now, the pressure does seem to be working, though, in certain situations. We saw Lizzo, who we all know, come out, and influencer Chris Olsen come out and speak out saying, since the digital guillotine pressure was put on, they've said and supported and asked their followers to go and support those who are suffering in Gaza. And so then you have the altercations after the fact there of some fans saying, hey, this is too late. You've been silent for over a year. But some fans are saying, hey, now our movement is working. The pressure we're putting on is working. And so there's always going to be this divisive content that we're seeing in relation to the war. But this is just an interesting turn in terms of how people are calling on celebrities that they love to speak out about causes that they love. Hallie.
Maura Barrett, thank you very much. We'll see how it goes at Cannes over the course of the next few days. Appreciate it. Coming up after all the hype, it is game on for Caitlin Clark. We are live in Connecticut for her first WNBA tip-off just hours before it happens. That's coming up. We are just hours, nay, minutes away from Caitlin Clark's WNBA regular season debut tonight with her Indiana Fever facing off against the Connecticut Sun in the season opener. And guess what? It is a totally sold-out game. That's the first time that's happened for the Sun since 2003. I'm going to tell you who Caitlin Clark is. I probably don't have to because you probably already know. She's the all-time scoring leader, man or woman, right? She's the #1 scorer in college basketball, and she's drawing record audiences. Her 2 straight Final Four appearances playing for Iowa. And the broadcast of the WNBA draft, where she was the first overall pick, was the highest rated WNBA broadcast. That includes games, by the way. So game, draft, whatever, in more than 2 decades. It's monster, right? She's helping to drive a ton of momentum for the WNBA, which is something that I talked about with the league's commissioner when we sat down one-on-one. Listen. I love the story about your son, what he said last night to you about...
So in an NBA game, one of the players hit like a logo 3, and he said, Mom, that was like a Caitlin Clark 3. So people are paying attention to the style and the game that our players are playing.
NBC's Stephanie Gosk is courtside at the Mohegan Sun Arena in Connecticut. Are those going to be your seats for the game, Steph? Like, that's it?
Oh, no, sadly. This is just a temporary privilege, which is kind of cool because both the teams are warming up. I mean, that's Caitlin Clark right there. I mean, I could just sort of run out and shake her hand if I wanted to. You know. We've been watching the people pile into this arena, and, you know, you see kids, parents with Iowa shirts on, Indiana Fever shirts. None of them are from Indiana or Iowa. They are just excited to come here and see this game. And it's that kind of energy that you feel all over this arena right now. I had a chance to talk to some of the parents, the moms, the daughters, the basketball players about why they were here. Listen to what one of them said to me.
She just finished her 5th year playing for University of Lynchburg. And to sit in the stands as a parent and see that, you know, they're not even a quarter filled. And then you look at the Iowa team and you see what she's brought to the game and the interest in women's basketball. It's unbelievable.
You know, we've been talking a lot about the new fans, Hallie, that have come to the WNBA or come to women's basketball because of Caitlin Clark. But I want to also talk about the fans that have always been here, that have had season tickets for years, or the people who have supported the WNBA for years and years. This is their moment as well, because they have been working hard to get this sport the recognition that it deserves, and they feel like they're finally on the cusp of that happening, Hallie.
Okay, on the cusp, right, which is an interesting turn of phrase, Steph, because I think there's a big question right now as to the momentum that the WNBA is feeling and how they hold on to it. Because one of the things that came up in my conversation with the WNBA commissioner was this idea that she's been laying the foundation in case of a moment like this one. Well, now they've caught lightning in the bottle. How do you keep that going?
All right, well, first of all, don't put the lightning in the bottle. Put the lightning on the court. And that's what they're doing. And ultimately, that's what's got to happen. That excitement, that game, people are going to come and watch and have a different appreciation for the way that women play this sport as compared to the way that men play this sport. And, you know, we see that in a number of other different sports. Think about how we watch tennis, for instance. You know, women and men play the games differently. There is a certain kind of art to the way women play this game that is different than the way men play. So get the eyeballs, get the attention. You know, what's interesting about this is there's so much talk about Caitlin Clark, and I've had the opportunity to speak to her a couple of times, including today, and what's remarkable is how cool she remains. Listen to this soundbite from earlier today.
Caitlin, it feels like we were just at the draft, and now you're here. That's not a lot of time with the team. How's it feeling?
I mean, I'm excited. I think this is the best way to do it. Just get out there and go for it. You know, it doesn't really feel like my first game. Like, I feel like it's just kind of another basketball game that you prepare for in the same way you always have.
I mean, just another basketball game, right? Like, she's totally nonplussed by any of this. And it's probably what makes her so amazing at this game, is that even with all this pressure and all this attention, she just loves to play. She is so grounded, Hallie.
I'm obsessed with that. Just another game. Is she still out there behind you, Steph? I can't tell on our monitor here. Do you see her? All right, that's all right.
No, but she wasn't, you know, earlier she was just hitting threes. just hitting them. I mean, I don't know. What was it? Like,
well, you get
15
it.
out of 6.
You can relate.
Yeah, we were just sitting there, like, in awe. Oh, yeah. Oh, of course I can. It was wonderful in my day.
I so hope that you get a chance to get, are you going to watch the game? And I just want to know real quick, if you can tell me.
We are going to watch the game. It's going to be super fun. I'm excited.
I'm super, super excited for you. We'll be looking at your Instagram or whatever for those snaps. Steph, thank you so much. Stephanie Gosk, have fun. Appreciate it. That does it for us for this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.